out of all the deaths you've seen in movies, which one really stands out to you as the worst? Hilary Swank in $1 Million Baby, almost becoming world champion, then paralyzed, her family only caring about the money she won from boxing, then having her limbs chopped off because of bed sores that got infected. All this just to be put down as an act of kindness, like the story she foretold of her dog she grew up with. I will never watch that movie again. Edit. What made it all worse was I thought it was going to be a female version of Rocky. It was not. Paul Dano's character in Looper. It's one of the very few times a movie has deeply disturbed me. For reference, his older self that has been sent back in time is running through whatever city, and pieces of himself start disappearing. This is because the mob bosses in the past have captured him and slowly torture him over a period of years. He finally makes it to the place where his past self is being held and tortured. He opens the door as his legs and arms are disappearing and is promptly shot in the head. So basically an entire lifetime of mutilation, torture, and murder condensed to a few-minute scene. In the Nickelodeon show Jimmy Neutron, there is an episode of the show where everyone in town shrinks. There's a scene where Jimmy's dad and mom watch a movie from a toy RC car as if it's a drive-in. The movie is some animated Gulliver's Travels sort of deal. The giant picks up one of the small, Smurf-sized in comparison, people and starts slowly lifting him over to his mouth. The whole time the small boy is flailing and screaming, "Please, I don't want to die. No, no, no," begging for his life as he goes into the giant's mouth. That scene was traumatizing as a kid and it still bothers me to this day. This is all potentially interesting stuff, and it's right in Jolie's wheelhouse. She's tough but wild, strong but vulnerable. She is drawn to playing broken people who find their resilience. Those Who Wish Me Dead, directed by Taylor Sheridan, whose screenplays for Sicario and Hell or High Water show his gift for mixing taut thrillers with complex character studies, gives us the bare bones of Hannah's issues, but the film leaps around so much, working to incorporate multiple narratives, including a massive forest fire, and tossing it all together inhibits the kind of emotions a film like Those Who Wish Me Dead requires. The movie feels like a throwback to the disaster films of the 1970s, like The Poseidon Adventure or Towering Inferno, where character development is cursory at best, since the main game is the disaster unfolding around the characters. So I just watched Life last night and it's really stuck in my head right now. I spent the evening thinking, well, all of that was entirely unpleasant. There was a comment here that gave me a flashback to something I wanted to post but I've forgotten already. But that guy in Starship Troopers that gets his head sliced off when the flying bugs attack the base. That one actually surprised me even on my second viewing of the movie because I forgot about it from the first time. And then in Cloverfield, when the girl that was bitten by the bugs shedded from the big beast gets isolated behind the plastic sheeting and suddenly pops. Of course, I'm old enough to say the Nazi who got his face melted in Raiders of the Lost Ark fucked me up for a while too. And of course, even though it doesn't count as a death, when the alien ripped Ash in half, that was completely unexpected back in the day, so that was a massive shock. Almost every single death in the Saw franchise, that guy who got his hands crushed to the point where they were bloody and his bones were turned to powder, then got cut in half by the swinging axe as his guts were being flung all over the place. Those people who had to give a pint of blood and in order to do so had to saw down their arms from in between their fingers. That dude who had to crawl through a whole room of barbed wire and cut himself so deep he left a trail of stomach cast. Or those people who had to cut off pieces of themselves, and whoever gave them most flesh lived they went to the point of cutting off their own arms to do so. I could go on. For me, it's a scene from Band of Brothers, The American Soldier, The Quinters, crests a hill with rifle in hand and sees a lone German soldier. Their eyes meet. The German soldier is incredibly young. Too young. They both pause and a small smile tugs on the German's face. A split second of relief, of hope that he could live. He is unarmed. As he looks upon Winter's face and sees the fear in his eyes, the smile fades. Winters immediately shoots him down. It was like he was trying to kill his own humanity, trying to stop himself from viewing the enemy as a person, as himself, not confronting what the consequences actually are. Jesse's death in A Nightmare on Elm Street, 2010 film, wasn't bad enough that Freddy killed him while he was sleepwalking. But then Freddy informs Jesse's slowly fading subconscious that the human brain doesn't completely shut down after death for another 7 minutes or so, resulting in Jesse releasing a helpless blood-curdling scream. What makes this scene even more cringe-inducing is having to come to terms with the realization of what he did to his other victims after he already killed them. A short film about killing, the worst movie I've ever seen. And I remember how the taxi driver was murdered. That was not so easy, as he stubbornly refused to die. In the end, he lost his false teeth and the murderer tried to tread them into the muddy ground. The teeth stubbornly refused to go down. 2. There is a close contender, though. That's a German thriller where they are dealing with a cold case, a child who drowned in a cellar in Munich. It turned out it was children playing and it ended bad. They tied the kid to a chair, then let water flow into the cellar, with the idea that he had to free himself before things went bad, but he could not, and they could not get in anymore. They didn't think of alerting any adults to the situation either. That was all pretty bad. Who comes up with stuff like that? Not me personally, but what it did to my mom. Lance Corporal Blake in the film 1917. All that work to save the German pilot's life just to get shanked and slowly bleed out. My older brother was Army, so I guess that's why my mom couldn't stop crying. Said she loved the movie but could never watch it again because of that scene. Then again, she also cried during Iron Man when Tony Stark went to random town, Middle East and killed all those terrorists, so I don't know. There is this iconic scene in Oorlog's Winter, a movie about the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. Now most of the movie is pretty PG-13, since it is based on a kid's book. However, at some point the main character's horse breaks its leg, and this teenager then has to put down the horse by shooting it through its head. The horse sort of symbolizes the kid's childhood innocence, as he tended to the horse since before the war. So when he pulls the trigger you feel this immense sense that something of great value has been lost. First death scene that comes to mind, and it isn't even a person. Very heart-wrenching stuff. I explained this one before, but worth the retelling. To be fair, it was a Kevin's death, but still. In Sin City, Kevin had all his limbs sawed off. Then, some wolf comes over and starts eating the guy while still alive. What was fucking creepy was the victim didn't even make a sound. Marv, who did the deed, couldn't believe he was seeing. Sure, Kevin was to being quartered and eaten as gotta fucked, but he was also a known torturer. Marv meant to be a good guy yet resorts to torture on this motherfucker. Marv was getting annoyed that Kevin just stayed in silence, clearly accepting his fate thanks to the torturous killing he does. Fed up, Marv opted to saw off Kevin's head, finally killing him for good. There's a small independent Aussie movie Van Diemen's Land based on a true story of a group of escaped convicts in the 1700s in Australia who get lost in the bush and eat each other, one by one. Anyway, they want to kill and eat this one guy first who is a straggler and they're quickly starving. They wait until he's asleep, then smash him in the head with a pickaxe and he screams and runs around in a circle, clearly suffering from a massive traumatic brain injury. They chase after him trying to finish the job as he goes into a seizure. while he's screaming out this garbled nonsense that sounds like somebody speaking in tongues. Kudos to the actor. I saw it when I was maybe 25 and I nearly cried. To this day I've never been able to watch it again. I rewatched the whole movie and skipped over that part. I actively seek out ultra-violent movies, but this one, never again. Not from a movie, but SCP deaths freak me out. The first one that came to mind was the second D-Class from SCP-469, Many-Winged Angel. Hearing the screams of the first D-Class but being forced to approach the SCP anyways and then dying an unimaginably painful death. SCP is scary. Edit from the SCP Wiki. Any human or animal that touches or gets too close to the surface of the creature will be quickly enveloped by the outstretching wings and drawn inside. Despite the feather's soft appearance, each hair has a sharp point that quickly pierces through clothing and into bare flesh, releasing a neurotoxin that immediately stimulates all the pain receptors in the body, as well as other stimulants to keep the victim from passing out too quickly. This is to make the victim scream loudly, thus feeding SCP-469 even more until the victim eventually goes into shock. SCP-469 is responsible for the loss of 4 personnel this way. Touching SCP-469 with dead or non-living objects has no effect. Not the worst I've seen, but the one that stuck to me the most was in a horror movie. She was tortured, hung upside down and chopped in half while still alive. Reading description advised. Let me know how to black out text, please. The worst death I saw was real. I remember walking home and seeing a black cat convulsing on the ground before it caved in and died. The death. Poison. Afterward I went back to see it again so I can get someone to take away. I saw kids poking its corpse. Then a week later my own cat got poisoned. Luckily I didn't see her die, but it's horrifying. That's why I promised that if I find out who poisoned the cat and mine, I will hold no regard for the law and absolutely poison them. On a less traumatizing note, I saw multiple baby birds fall off the nest and splat on the sidewalk and get eaten by my aunt's dog. Back to cats. One cat I had that I blame my mom for his death was when I just got lucky. I haven't had the kitten for a month and my mom left it in the bathroom and closed the door. I remember begging my mom to let the cat out or at least put something warm in the bathroom with him. She should have listened to me because we went to bed me mad at my mom, and my cat that I loved and adored turned on the sink, got water on him and died on the way to the vet because of hypothermia. And this is why I don't trust anyone with my pets. I get anxiety letting anyone near them, or leaving them alone. Define worst. We might define it differently. Most brutal, most heartbreaking, most bloody, most emotionally destructive. You get the idea. There are 2 death scenes that stick out to me in particular as being the worst. The most emotionally charged one has to be the last scene in When the Wind Blows. Those of you not in the know about this little animated flick, I'll give a brief synopsis. Obviously spoilers follow. The movie, like the comic book, follows the blogs. Jim and Hilda, a retired couple who live in the English countryside. Jim attempts to keep abreast of the international situation as the Cold War rages, with what seems to be minimal to no understanding of the dangers. Hilda seems to be basically a housewife and happy about it. As you learn more and more about them, you slowly get emotionally attached. I did, at least. The Cold War turns hot and the nukes fly. They end up getting severe radiation sickness and you watch them progress through the stages of it over a few days. In the final scene of the movie you get a juxtaposition of Psalms 23 and the charge of the Light Brigade as the radiation sickness finally takes its toll upon them. I personally consider it the single most soul-crushing film ever made. That's actually saying a lot, as I've seen a lot of films in my life. and I've been in a Cold War kick during the pandemic to remind me how bad it could be. As for the most gory and horrible one, I'd have to go with the being sliced in half by a glass door in the 13 Ghosts remake. It's a personal phobia of mine. I hate glass doors like that. Scarface chainsaw scene. Accidentally saw it when I was 8. Walked in and my dad had been watching it. Scarred me for years. In general, scenes where PPL takes sick enjoyment in the killing tends to bother me. Joe Pesci's death in Casino also comes to mind. He was a bad person, but how they make him watch his brother be beat to death with baseball bats and get buried alive while knowing he's next is awful. Also, the smiles on their faces while it's going on is just disturbing. Blay. Word 1 for me. Stoic the Vast in Hip 2. It stands out as brutal as, if Stoic didn't intervene, Drago would have made Toothless, Hiccup's best friend for 5 years at the events of the movie, kill Hiccup. That's just messed up. Honorable mention as no death but still messed up was Alan, twice, Firma and Tindon in Thunderbirds, 2004. At first, the Hood tries to incinerate all 3 of these kids. Alan and Tintin were probably 16-18, Firma 13-15, using Thunderbird 1, all survived. Hood is Tintin's uncle as well. Then the Hood dangles Alan over the mole's drill bit, which is running, stepping on his hands to get him to fall and ... in front of his father. This movie almost got a G rating. The scene I thought of was one I actually saw just today. In an older movie, the guy, we'll call him John, convinced the other, we'll call him Scott, to get into a straitjacket and sit in a chair. Then, John showed Scott a box of bullets. He said, "We're gonna play roulette with this revolver, but I'll make the odds better for you. Half these bullets have the powder removed, half do not." Then, John psychologically toyed with Scott for a while, before asking him to pick a bullet that would potentially lead to both their deaths. Scott didn't know which bullets would kill him and which wouldn't. He didn't have a choice but to pick one, to be a pawn in his own painful death. I think that's the worst way to go, to be psychologically toyed with, and punished, especially by someone you trusted. When I was a kid, there was this B-movie called Deadly Friend, where this kid tries to save his dead girlfriend by reviving her into a cyborg body. It sort of works, but she's also not quite all there and had some issues adjusting to being part robot. Anyhow, the neighborhood crazy old lady, played by Anne Ramsey, aka Mrs. Fratelli from Goonies, confiscates the kid's basketball. So, not understanding subtlety, Robo-Girl sneaks into her house and uses her robo-strength to hurl the basketball at the old lady's head. This, of course, explodes said head in true 80s B-movie gore style, and then the headless body goes stumbling and flopping around in an incredibly disturbing manner, until it collapses haphazardly into the floor. If you'd like to enjoy the scene for yourself, it's an SFW in a cheesy, horror sort of way. https://t9pgwps2 https://b/Katie Nikki and the Deer Hunter. When Nikki and Michael escaped certain death as pals only to get separated, Nikki's PTSD kicked in and sent him to such a dark place he had completely forgotten who he was and made no effort to return home. Even though Michael made it back, he started playing Russian roulette competitively, developing a false sense of invincibility. Michael returned to Vietnam to find him after hearing Nikki had been sending money home to his family every month. After a week of exhaustive searching and paying thousands of dollars to get in the same room with the shell of the man he called his best friend, the only way he could get in was by placing a bet against him in the game. He tried talking sense into him and you could see the gears starting to turn in Nikki's head. But when his turn begins, he reverts back to the ghostly muscle memory of what he'd been doing all those months. Michael finally got him to remember home by reminiscing on their deer hunting days, recalling the oath that a deer has to be taken in one shot. One shot. Nikki smiling in agreement then pulls the trigger on a loaded chamber. For all we know, his acknowledgement of that oath meant he would return home if he landed on an empty chamber. But that's not what happened. Poor Michael, after all that work to save his body, left helplessly on the floor holding him in his arms. That has to be the most riveting scene in movie history. The acting is so good the world around you fades away as you are pulled into the screen. You hold your breath, and are completely absorbed in the moment. Then it leaves you devastated and traumatized.